The gunshot echoed across the plains as Daisy Turner frantically urged her horse forward, the blood from her shoulder wound seeping through her cotton blouse. The year was 1875, and the Montana Territory held no mercy for a woman alone. Behind her, the pounding hooves of her pursuers' horses grew louder with each passing minute, and ahead of her lay the foreboding darkness of Wolf Creek Forest. "I won't let them take me," she muttered through gritted teeth, clutching the leather pouch containing her father's gold claim papers tighter against her chest. The setting sun cast long shadows across the rugged landscape as Daisy steered her exhausted mare toward the tree line. Her father's warnings about traveling alone echoed in her mind, but after finding him murdered in their cabin, she had no choice but to flee with the proof of their rightful claim. The horse stumbled, nearly sending Daisy tumbling to the ground. She could hear the men shouting behind her now, their voices carrying clearly in the crisp autumn air. "She's heading into Wolf Creek. Cut her off at the pass." Daisy's heart raced as she entered the dense forest, branches whipping her face as she ducked low over her horse's neck. The mare was breathing heavily, foam forming at its mouth. She knew they couldn't keep this pace much longer, but stopping meant certain death or worse. "Please, just a little further," she whispered, patting the horse's sweaty neck. Night was falling quickly, and with it came the bone-chilling cold of the Montana wilderness. The bullet had only grazed her shoulder, but the pain was intensifying, and Daisy was beginning to feel light-headed. The sounds of pursuit had faded somewhat, but she knew better than to believe she'd lost them. After another mile, her mare finally refused to go any further, coming to a stop beside a small creek. Daisy dismounted carefully, wincing at the pain shooting through her arm. She needed to rest, if only for a moment, and the horse needed water. Leading the exhausted animal to the creek, she cupped her hand and drank deeply of the cold mountain water before examining her wound in the fading light. "Not as bad as it could be," she murmured, tearing a strip of fabric from her petticoat to bind it. Her father had taught her well how to shoot, how to track, how to survive, but nothing had prepared her for being hunted like an animal. As she finished dressing her wound, a sound froze her blood. A long, mournful howl echoed through the trees, followed by another and then another. Wolves. The forest hadn't earned its name by coincidence. Daisy's mare nickered nervously, pulling at the reins tied to a low-hanging branch. "Easy, girl," Daisy soothed, though her own heart was hammering in her chest. The howls were getting closer, and Daisy knew she needed to move. But as she reached for her horse's reins, distant voices reached her ears. Her pursuers had found her trail again. She was caught between the wolves and the men who had murdered her father. With trembling hands, she retrieved the rifle from her saddle holster and checked the ammunition. 3 bullets left, not enough for a prolonged fight against men or beasts. The wolves howled again, much closer now. Daisy untied her horse, hoping to at least give the animal a chance to escape, but the mare refused to leave her side. Loyal to a fault. "Let's go, then," she whispered, leading the horse deeper into the forest, away from both threats. The night grew darker, and the temperature dropped further. Daisy's wound throbbed with each step, and she knew she was leaving a blood trail that both predators could follow. After another half-mile, she spotted a small rock formation with a cave-like opening. It wasn't ideal, but it might provide some shelter for the night. She had just secured her horse when the first wolf appeared at the edge of the clearing, its eyes reflecting the moonlight. Then another appeared, and another. Daisy raised her rifle, aiming at the largest wolf, but didn't fire. Every shot would bring her human hunters closer. The lead wolf took a step forward, a low growl rumbling from its throat. Daisy backed slowly toward the cave entrance, keeping the rifle trained on the animal. Her horse whinnied in fear, pulling desperately at its tether. Suddenly, a shot rang out, and one of the wolves yelped in pain before darting back into the trees. The others hesitated, looking toward the source of the gunfire. Daisy swung her rifle in the same direction, expecting to see her pursuers. Instead, a lone figure on horseback emerged from the trees, rifle raised. In the moonlight, she could see it was a man wearing a wide-brimmed hat, his face shadowed. "Don't move, miss," the man called out. "Those wolves aren't your only problem tonight." Daisy kept her rifle aimed at him. "Are you with Rawlins and his men?" Don't know any Rawlins, the man replied, urging his horse forward slowly. But I do know those men tracking you aren't friendly sorts. The wolves were circling now, unsure of the new arrival but still hungry and interested in the wounded prey. Miss, I suggest we deal with one problem at a time, the man said, nodding toward the wolves. Unless you'd prefer to take your chances with them alone. Before Daisy could respond, shouts echoed through the forest, much closer than before. Her pursuers had heard the gunshot. She's cornered by wolves, they cried, their voices carrying through the trees. The stranger turned his horse toward the sound, his posture tense. Then let's see who bites harder, he said grimly. He dismounted with fluid grace, leading his horse to stand beside Daisy's. Name's Thomas Holt. People call me Tucker, and I reckon you're in a world of trouble, madam. Daisy Turner, she replied, lowering her rifle slightly but keeping it ready. And yes, I am, Tucker nodded toward her shoulder. You're bleeding, bullet wound, just a graze. The wolves were growing bolder, the scent of blood drawing them closer. Tucker fired another warning shot into the air, causing them to retreat temporarily. We've got about 2 minutes before those men arrive, and maybe 5 before these wolves decide we're worth the risk, Tucker said calmly, as if discussing the weather. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to back into that cave, get a fire started to keep the wolves at bay, and then have a little chat about why those men want you dead. Daisy hesitated, unsure whether to trust this stranger. I don't have many options, do I? She finally said. Tucker's teeth flashed white in a brief smile. Not at the moment, no. Together they backed into the cave, leading their horses with them. The opening was larger than it had appeared, with enough room for them and their mounts. Tucker worked quickly, gathering what dry wood he could find near the entrance and starting a small fire while Daisy kept watch, her rifle trained on the forest. They're coming, she whispered as lantern light flickered between the trees. Tucker nodded, taking position beside her with his own rifle. How many? 5 at least, Rawlins and his men. They killed my father 3 days ago. Tucker's expression hardened. Why? Gold claim. My father found a rich vein on our property. Rawlins wants it. The wolves had retreated into the shadows, but hadn't gone far. The men with lanterns were approaching cautiously, spreading out to surround the clearing. I count 6 men, Tucker murmured. Bad odds. I won't let them take me, Daisy said firmly. I'd rather face the wolves. Tucker studied her face in the dim firelight. You won't have to do either, not if you trust me. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an understanding, a connection that neither could explain. Daisy found herself nodding despite her reservations. What's your plan? She asked. First, let's get that wound properly tended, Tucker said, reaching into his saddlebag for a small medical kit. As he cleaned and rebandaged her shoulder, he continued speaking in a low voice. Those men expect to find you alone and cornered. They don't know I'm here yet, and they certainly don't expect you to fight back. Daisy winced as he applied pressure to the wound. I've got 3 bullets left, and I've got a full chamber plus spare ammunition, Tucker replied, but bullets aren't our only weapons. Outside, the men were calling to each other, closing in on the cave. The wolves had disappeared, driven away by the larger group of humans. Rawlins, I can see her horse, one of the men shouted. She's in that cave. Tucker finished binding Daisy's wound and moved to the horses, whispering soothingly to calm them. He retrieved something from his saddlebag, a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Dynamite, he explained at Daisy's questioning look. I was headed to Silver Creek to help clear a mining tunnel. Now it's going to clear us a path out of here. Daisy's eyes widened. You're going to blow up the cave? No, just create enough of a distraction that we can slip away in the confusion. Tucker checked the fuse. When I give the signal, be ready to mount up and ride hard. Daisy Turner. A deep voice called from outside. We know you're in there, girl. Come out now and we'll make it quick. Keep hiding and it'll go much worse for you. Tucker positioned himself at the edge of the cave entrance, keeping to the shadows. That would be Rawlins, I take it. Daisy nodded, her face pale but determined. Frederick Rawlins, he offered to buy our claim. When my father refused, they came in the night. And you escaped with the claim papers, Tucker guessed. Daisy touched the leather pouch hidden inside her blouse. They're all I have left of my father's dreams. Outside, Rawlins was growing impatient. Boys spread out and approach from all sides. She's just one wounded woman. Tucker struck a match and held it ready. On my signal, mount up and follow me. Stay close and don't look back. Daisy positioned herself by her horse, gathering the reins in her hand. Tucker lit the fuse on the dynamite, waited a moment, then hurled it toward the trees opposite their intended escape route. Now, he shouted as the dynamite sailed through the air. They mounted their horses in a fluid motion, Tucker leading the way out of the cave just as the dynamite exploded with a thunderous roar. Trees splintered and men shouted in confusion and fear. Gunshots rang out wildly, but the darkness and chaos made aiming impossible. Tucker and Daisy rode hard through the gap in the men's formation, the explosion and darkness providing the cover they needed. Behind them, Rawlins was shouting orders, trying to reorganize his men for pursuit. Head for the river, Tucker called over his shoulder. We need to lose them before dawn. Daisy followed close behind, ducking low over her horse's neck as bullets whizzed past. The forest was dense, making it difficult for their pursuers to track them in the darkness. After a few miles, the sounds of pursuit faded, but Tucker kept up the pace, leading them through a winding path that seemed to double back on itself at times. Finally, they reached a swift, flowing river, its waters black in the moonlight. Tucker reined in his horse and waited for Daisy to catch up. We'll ride downstream a ways before crossing, he explained. Water will hide our scent from any tracking dogs they might have, and it'll make our trail harder to follow. Daisy nodded, too exhausted to speak. The adrenaline was wearing off and the pain in her shoulder had returned with a vengeance. Tucker noticed her pallor and frowned. We need to rest soon and check that wound properly, he said. There's a trapper's cabin about 2 miles downstream. Friend of mine uses it in the winter months. Should be empty now. They followed the river, riding in its shallows to mask their tracks. The moon was high overhead by the time they reached the cabin, a small, sturdy structure nestled among pine trees. Tucker dismounted and helped Daisy from her horse, catching her when her legs buckled beneath her. Easy now, he murmured, supporting her weight as they approached the cabin. Almost there. The cabin was simple but clean, with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and a single bed against the far wall. Tucker settled Daisy on the bed before tending to the horses, removing their saddles and brushing them down before securing them in a small lean-to attached to the cabin. When he returned, Daisy was barely conscious, her face flushed with fever. Tucker cursed under his breath and moved quickly to start a fire in the fireplace. Once it was burning steadily, he gathered clean water from a nearby spring and set it to boil. Daisy, he said gently, sitting beside her on the bed, I need to look at your wound again. It may be infected. She nodded weakly, trying to help as he removed her jacket and carefully cut away the blood-soaked bandage. The wound was angry and inflamed, the skin hot to the touch. Bullet didn't exit clean, Tucker muttered, examining the wound carefully. There might be fragments still inside. Daisy's eyes fluttered open, meeting his with clarity despite her fever. You'll have to dig them out, Tucker nodded grimly. It'll hurt. I'm tougher than I look, she replied with a ghost of a smile. Tucker prepared what he needed, a knife heated in the fire until the blade glowed red, clean bandages, whiskey from his saddlebag for both disinfection and pain relief. He helped Daisy drink a generous amount before pouring some over the wound, drawing a hiss of pain from her lips. Ready? He asked, knife in hand. Daisy nodded, gripping the bedframe with white-knuckled hands. Do it. Tucker worked quickly and efficiently, his hands steady as he extracted tiny fragments of the bullet from her shoulder. Daisy remained conscious throughout, her only signs of distress the occasional sharp intake of breath and the tears that slid silently down her cheeks. When he finished, Tucker cleaned the wound again and bandaged it with fresh cloth. You did well, he said softly. Braver than most men I've known. Daisy managed a weak smile. My father always said I was too stubborn for my own good. Tucker returned the smile, his eyes warm as he tucked a blanket around her. Rest now. We're safe here for the night. As Daisy drifted into an exhausted sleep, Tucker sat by the fire, rifle across his knees, keeping watch. He found himself studying her face in repose, the delicate curve of her cheek, the determined set of her jaw even in sleep. There was something about this woman that intrigued him, beyond the circumstances of their meeting. Morning came with pale light filtering through the cabin's single window. Tucker had dozed off briefly in the chair, but was instantly alert at the sound of Daisy stirring. "Water?" she asked, her voice raspy. Tucker brought her a cup and helped her sit up to drink it. Her fever had broken during the night and some color had returned to her cheeks. "Thank you," she said after drinking deeply. "For everything. You saved my life last night." Tucker shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "Couldn't very well leave you to the wolves, four-legged or two-legged. Why were you in those woods? It's not exactly on the way to anywhere." Tucker hesitated, then sat on the edge of the bed. "I was tracking Rawlins and his men. They've been causing trouble all over the territory. Robbing stage coaches, jumping claims, worse. I didn't know your name or your story, but when I saw them chasing a lone woman, I figured they weren't up to any good." "Are you a lawman?" Daisy asked, studying his face with new interest. Tucker smiled wryly. "Used to be. Deputy U.S. Marshal out of Fort Benton. Resigned my badge after a disagreement with the chief marshal about how certain wealthy citizens were above the law. So now you're what? A vigilante?" "I prefer to think of myself as a freelance purveyor of justice," Tucker replied with a hint of humor. "But right now, I'm just a man helping a lady in distress." Daisy sat up straighter, wincing slightly at the pull on her wound. "I'm not a damsel who needs rescuing, Mr. Holt. I was doing fine on my own." Tucker's eyebrow rose. "Cornered by wolves and outlaws with 3 bullets to your name, that's your definition of fine." A reluctant smile tugged at Daisy's lips. "Perhaps I was in a bit of a predicament." "A bit," Tucker agreed, returning her smile. "Now, are you going to tell me the full story about your father's claim and why Rawlins wants it badly enough to kill for it?" Daisy's expression sobered. She reached inside her blouse and withdrew the leather pouch, opening it to reveal several official-looking documents and a hand-drawn map. "My father, William Turner, came out here 5 years ago after my mother died. He was a geologist from Boston, fascinated by the reports of gold in the Montana Territory. We settled on a small parcel of land near Blackwater Creek." "I know the area," Tucker nodded. "Beautiful country." "It is," Daisy agreed, her eyes distant with memory. "We built a cabin, started a small garden. Father would go out prospecting most days while I kept house. 3 months ago, he found a vein of gold on our property, not just traces, but a substantial deposit. He filed the claim legally in Helena, got all the proper documentation." She tapped the papers in her lap. "Word got out, as it always does. Frederick Rawlins showed up 2 weeks later with an offer to buy us out. When Father refused, the threats began, first subtle, then not so subtle." Daisy's voice wavered slightly. 3 nights ago, they came to the cabin. Father told me to hide in the root cellar. I heard everything, Rawlins demanding the claim papers, Father refusing, the gunshot. When they left, I found him on the floor. His last words were to take the papers and run to find the marshal in Helena." Tucker reached out and covered her hand with his. "I'm sorry, Daisy," she nodded, blinking back tears. "I gathered what supplies I could and rode out that night. They caught up to me yesterday morning, chased me into those woods. You know the rest." They sat in silence for a moment, Tucker's hand still covering hers. The simple human contact was comforting in a way neither of them had expected. "Helena's still 3 days' ride from here," Tucker finally said. "Rawlins and his men will be searching every trail between here and there." "I have to try," Daisy insisted. "My father died protecting this claim. I can't let Rawlins steal it." Tucker studied her face, seeing the determination in her eyes despite her weakened state. "There might be another way. I know the territorial judge in Virginia City. It's closer than Helena, and he can authenticate your claim and issue warrants for Rawlins and his men. You'd help me get there." Daisy asked, surprise evident in her voice. "I told you I've been tracking Rawlins for weeks. Your testimony could help put him away for good." Tucker paused, then added more softly, "And I'd sleep better knowing you reached safety." Daisy smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her face and made Tucker's heart skip a beat. "Well then, Mr. Holt, it seems we have a mutual interest in reaching Virginia City." "Tucker," he corrected. "If we're going to be traveling together, you might as well use my name." Tucker, she repeated, the name sounding right on her lips. When do we leave? Tomorrow morning, if you're strong enough. You need another day to rest, and I need to make sure we're not being followed. Daisy nodded, settling back against the pillow. Tomorrow, then. Tucker spent the day securing the cabin, checking and cleaning their weapons, and hunting for fresh meat. He returned mid-afternoon with 2 rabbits, which he dressed and prepared for stew. Daisy insisted on helping despite her injury, sitting at the table to chop the wild onions and carrots Tucker had gathered. They worked together in comfortable silence, the domestic scene a stark contrast to their desperate flight the night before. As the stew simmered over the fire, filling the cabin with its savory aroma, Tucker found himself watching Daisy, admiring the graceful way she moved despite her injury, the determined set of her chin, the intelligence in her eyes. "Tell me about Boston," he said as they sat down to eat. "I've never been east of the Mississippi." Daisy's face lit up as she described her childhood home, the cobblestone streets, the harbor filled with ships from around the world, the libraries and theaters and music halls. Tucker listened, entranced not just by the descriptions of a world so different from his own, but by the animation in her voice as she spoke. "What about you?" she asked after a while. "Where are you from originally?" Tucker leaned back in his chair, swirling the coffee in his cup. "Texas originally. Father had a small ranch outside of Dallas, lost it during the war. After that, we drifted north and west. I've been in Montana territory for about 8 years now." "And your family?" "Gone," Tucker said simply. "Father died of pneumonia the first winter here. Mother followed a year later. No siblings." Daisy reached across the table and touched his hand briefly. "I'm sorry." Tucker shrugged, but the gentle touch had affected him more than he wanted to admit. "Made a life for myself here. Became a marshal, then quit when I realized some men were above the law if they had enough money or influence." "Men like Rawlins," Daisy guessed. "Exactly like Rawlins. He has friends in high places, bribes the right officials. That's why I've been tracking him, gathering evidence that even his connections can't ignore." "And now you have a witness to murder," Daisy said softly. Tucker nodded, his eyes meeting hers. "It's dangerous, Daisy. Even after we reach Virginia City, Rawlins won't stop coming for you as long as you're a threat to him." "I'm not afraid," she replied, her chin lifting in that determined way he was coming to admire. "My father taught me to stand up for what's right, no matter the cost." "You're a remarkable woman, Daisy Turner," Tucker said, the admiration clear in his voice. A blush colored her cheeks, but she held his gaze. "And you, Tucker Holt, are not the typical cowboy I expected to find in the Montana territory." They smiled at each other across the table, the connection between them growing stronger with each passing hour. That night, Tucker insisted on sleeping in the chair by the fire, giving Daisy the bed. Despite her protests about his comfort, he was adamant. "I've slept in worse places," he assured her. "And I'll need to keep watch in case Rawlins and his men find our trail." Daisy eventually relented, but as she drifted off to sleep, she found herself wishing he were closer. There was something about this man that made her feel safe in a way she hadn't since her father died, not just physically protected, but emotionally anchored in the midst of chaos. Dawn broke clear and cold. Tucker had already been up for an hour, checking the perimeter of the cabin and preparing the horses for travel. Daisy joined him outside, her face pale but determined, her wound properly bandaged beneath a clean shirt Tucker had found in the cabin's sparse supplies. "It's a bit large," she said, gesturing to the oversized garment, "but cleaner than mine." Tucker nodded approvingly. "How's the shoulder feeling?" "Sore, but manageable. I'm ready to ride." They mounted up, Tucker leading the way through the pine forest, following game trails rather than the main paths. The day was crisp and clear, the Montana sky an endless blue above the mountain peaks. Despite the danger of their situation, Daisy found herself enjoying the journey, especially the company of her quiet companion. By mid-morning, they had reached higher ground, and Tucker reined in his horse at a vantage point overlooking the valley below. He produced a small spyglass from his saddlebag and scanned the terrain carefully. "There," he said after a moment, passing the spyglass to Daisy, "about 5 miles back following the river." Daisy peered through the glass, spotting the group of riders moving along the riverbank. Rawlins. Tucker nodded grimly. Him and 4 others, they found our trail faster than I hoped. What do we do? Daisy asked, handing back the spyglass. Tucker studied the landscape, mentally calculating distances and terrain. We have 2 choices. We can push hard for Virginia City. It's still 2 days' ride at a normal pace, but we might make it in a day and a half if we ride through the night. Or we can try to lose them in the mountains, then double back toward Virginia City once we're clear. Daisy considered the options, then glanced at Tucker. Which way would you go if you were alone? The mountains, he admitted. But it's rough country, and with your injury. I'm tougher than I look, Daisy reminded him, echoing her words from the night before. And I'd rather face the mountains than Rawlins. Tucker studied her face, seeing the determination there. The mountains it is, then. They set off at a brisk pace, climbing higher into the rugged terrain. Tucker led them through narrow passes and across rocky slopes, always keeping an eye on their back trail. By mid-afternoon, they had gained significant elevation, and the air was noticeably cooler. We'll rest the horses here, Tucker said, dismounting beside a small spring bubbling from between rocks. There's good cover, and we can see anyone approaching from below. Daisy slid carefully from her saddle, trying not to wince as the movement pulled at her wound. Tucker noticed anyway, his brow furrowing with concern. Let me check that bandage, he said, leading her to sit on a fallen log while the horses drank from the spring. Daisy submitted to his examination, trying to ignore the warmth that spread through her at his gentle touch. The wound was healing well, with no signs of renewed infection. You're doing remarkably well, Tucker said as he replaced the bandage. Most people would be laid up for weeks with a wound like that. Most people don't have outlaws chasing them through wolf-infested forests, Daisy replied with a wry smile. Tucker chuckled, the sound rich and warm. Fair point. He sat beside her on the log, offering her his canteen. We've put some good distance between us and Rawlins. Another few hours, and we should be able to start heading west toward Virginia City. Daisy drank deeply, then passed the canteen back. Their fingers brushed, and neither pulled away immediately. For a moment they simply looked at each other, the connection between them almost tangible in the mountain air. A distant gunshot shattered the moment. Tucker was on his feet instantly, reaching for his rifle. They're closer than I thought, he muttered, scanning the slopes below. More shots rang out, followed by the distant sound of men shouting. Tucker grabbed the reins of both horses and led them deeper into the cover of the trees, gesturing for Daisy to follow. They've split up, he explained in a low voice as they secured the horses, trying to flank us. Daisy drew her own revolver, checking that it was fully loaded. What's the plan? Tucker's expression was grim but determined. We need to thin their numbers, even the odds. You mean kill them? Daisy asked, her voice steady despite the gravity of the question. Only if necessary, Tucker replied, but we need to make it clear that following us has consequences. They positioned themselves behind large boulders overlooking the trail they had just traveled. Within minutes, 2 riders appeared, moving cautiously up the slope. Tucker recognized them as members of Rawlins' gang, hard men with reputations for cruelty. Take the one on the left, Tucker whispered. Aim for the shoulder enough to take him out of the fight without killing him if possible. Daisy nodded, raising her revolver and steadying it against the rock. She took a deep breath, sighted down the barrel as her father had taught her, and squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed across the mountainside. The man on the left cried out, clutching his shoulder as he tumbled from his saddle. Tucker's shot followed an instant later, hitting the second man in the leg. Both men were down, wounded but alive, their horses bolting down the trail in panic. Good shooting, Tucker said, already moving back toward their horses. But the others will have heard. We need to move now. They mounted quickly and set off at a gallop, following a rocky ridge that would make their trail harder to follow. The terrain was treacherous, requiring all their concentration to navigate safely. By sunset, they had crossed over the ridge and were descending toward a narrow valley on the other side. We'll make camp there, Tucker said, pointing to a sheltered spot beneath an overhang of rock. It's defensible and we can see anyone approaching. They made a cold camp, not risking a fire that might be spotted. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped rapidly, and Daisy found herself shivering despite her jacket. "Here," Tucker said, noticing her discomfort. He removed his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. "But you'll freeze," Daisy protested. Tucker smiled. "I've spent winters up here trapping. This is practically summer weather to me." Daisy accepted the coat gratefully, wrapping it tighter around herself. It smelled of leather, pine, and something uniquely Tucker a scent she found oddly comforting. They sat close together, sharing jerky and hardtack from Tucker's saddlebags. The night was clear, with a canopy of stars spread above them in breathtaking array. Despite the danger of their situation, there was an intimacy to the moment that neither could deny. "Do you think we lost them?" Daisy asked softly. Tucker considered before answering. "For now, maybe, but Rawlins is determined. He won't give up easily. Because of the gold." "Partly," Tucker nodded. "But also because of pride. Men like Rawlins can't stand being defied, especially by a woman." Daisy sighed, leaning back against the rock wall. "All my father wanted was to build something for our future. He never expected it would cost him his life. What will you do?" Tucker asked. "If we make it to Virginia City and your claim is secured." "When we make it to Virginia City," Daisy corrected with a small smile. "I don't know, sell the claim maybe, start fresh somewhere else. Not interested in being a gold mine owner." Tucker's tone was light, but his eyes were serious as they studied her face in the moonlight. Daisy shook her head. "The gold was my father's dream, not mine. I just want to honor his memory by making sure Rawlins doesn't profit from his murder." "And what is your dream, Daisy Turner?" Tucker asked softly. The question caught her off guard. It had been so long since she'd thought about her own desires, focused as she'd been on helping her father and then on survival. "I used to dream of teaching," she finally said. "I love books, knowledge. In Boston, I assisted at a girls' school before father decided to come west." Tucker nodded, a smile playing at his lips. "I can see that. You'd make a fine teacher." "What about you?" Daisy asked. "What does Tucker Holt dream of?" He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze lifting to the stars. "Peace, I suppose. A place where right is right and wrong is wrong, without the complications of money and influence muddying the waters." "That sounds like a good dream," Daisy said softly. Their eyes met in the darkness, and something passed between them, an understanding, a recognition of kindred spirits despite their different backgrounds. Tucker's hand found hers, his calloused fingers entwining with her smaller ones. "We should get some rest," he said, his voice rough with an emotion he wasn't ready to name. "Long ride tomorrow." Daisy nodded, but neither moved to break the contact between them. They sat in companionable silence, hands joined, watching the stars wheel overhead until exhaustion finally claimed them both. Morning brought renewed determination. They set out at first light, Tucker leading them on a circuitous route that eventually turned west toward Virginia City. The terrain grew less rugged as they descended from the mountains, the pine forests giving way to rolling hills covered in sagebrush and grass. "We're making good time," Tucker said as they paused to rest the horses at midday. "Another 6 hours of riding should get us to Virginia City." Daisy nodded, stretching carefully to ease the stiffness in her injured shoulder. The wound was healing well, but the long hours in the saddle were taking their toll. Tucker noticed her discomfort and frowned. "We could rest longer," he offered. "Push on tomorrow." Daisy shook her head. "I'm fine. The sooner we reach Virginia City, the sooner this will be over." Tucker studied her face, admiring her determination even as he worried about her strength. Before he could respond, the distant thunder of hoofbeats reached their ears. "Riders coming," he said, instantly alert. "At least 4, moving fast." They mounted quickly, urging their horses into a gallop across the open plain. But the sound of pursuit grew louder, and when Tucker risked a glance back, he saw dust rising behind them, Rawlins and his remaining men closing the distance rapidly. "They've got fresh horses," he called to Daisy. "We can't outrun them on this terrain." "What do we do?" she called back, her face set with determination despite the fear in her eyes. Tucker scanned the landscape ahead, looking for any tactical advantage. About a half-mile ahead, a rocky outcropping rose from the plain, offering potential cover. "There," he pointed. We make our stand there. They raced for the rocks, reaching them just as the first shots from their pursuers whizzed past. Dismounting quickly, they led the horses behind the largest boulders and readied their weapons. 4 of them, Tucker confirmed, peering around the rock. Rawlins and 3 others. 5 bullets, Daisy said, checking her revolver. You, full chamber plus spare ammunition, Tucker replied. But they'll have us pinned down. We need a strategy, not just firepower. The pursuers had halted about 200 yards away, spreading out to surround the outcropping. Rawlins' voice carried clearly across the distance. Turner, we know you're in there with the claim papers. Come out now and maybe we'll let your friend live. Tucker and Daisy exchanged glances. He's lying, Daisy said quietly. Of course he is, Tucker agreed. He studied the rocks around them, formulating a plan. I need to draw their fire, get them to waste ammunition. Think you could work your way around to that higher position? He pointed to a shelf of rock about 20 feet up and to their right. Daisy followed his gaze and nodded. I can make it. What then? Once you're in position, I'll make a run for that boulder there. Tucker indicated a large rock about 30 yards to their left. They'll focus on me. You'll have clear shots from above. It was a risky plan, but their options were limited. Daisy squeezed Tucker's hand once before beginning her careful climb up the rocky slope, keeping low to avoid being seen. Tucker waited until she was safely in position, then called out to Rawlins. You want the woman and the papers? Come and get them. He fired 2 quick shots in Rawlins' direction, then sprinted for the boulder he'd indicated. Bullets kicked up dust around him as he ran, but he reached cover unharmed. The outlaws, focused on his movement, didn't notice Daisy's position above them. Her first shot took one of the men by surprise, striking him in the shoulder and sending him tumbling to the ground. The others whirled, firing wildly at the rocks above, but Daisy had already moved to a new position. Tucker used the distraction to take aim at another of Rawlins' men, his shot finding its mark in the man's leg. The outlaw fell, cursing loudly. Now it was 2 against 2, with the odds shifting in their favor. Rawlins was shouting orders, his voice tight with fury. Circle around, flush them out. The remaining outlaw began moving toward Tucker's position, while Rawlins himself headed for the slope where Daisy was hidden. Tucker took careful aim and fired, grazing the outlaw's arm. The man ducked behind a rock, returning fire but not advancing further. Above, Daisy watched Rawlins approaching her position, his rifle ready. She had 2 bullets left and needed to make them count. As he drew closer, she shifted position, preparing for a clear shot. A loose stone dislodged beneath her foot, clattering down the slope. Rawlins looked up, spotting her movement. With a triumphant shout, he raised his rifle and fired. The bullet struck the rock inches from Daisy's head, sending stone fragments flying. One sliced her cheek, drawing blood. Before Rawlins could fire again, she steadied her revolver and squeezed the trigger. Her shot struck true, hitting Rawlins in the chest. He staggered backward, surprise registering on his face before he collapsed to the ground. The last outlaw, seeing his leader fall, lost his nerve. He fired a few wild shots in Tucker's direction before mounting his horse and fleeing across the plain. Silence fell over the battlefield. Tucker emerged cautiously from cover, making his way to where Rawlins lay motionless on the ground. A quick check confirmed what he already knew: Frederick Rawlins would never threaten anyone again. Daisy, Tucker called, looking up at the rocks where he'd last seen her. She appeared at the edge of the outcropping, a small cut on her cheek but otherwise unharmed. Relief flooded through Tucker at the sight of her, a feeling so intense it almost buckled his knees. Daisy made her way down to where Tucker stood, her eyes fixed on Rawlins' body. Is he? Yes, Tucker confirmed softly. It's over, Daisy. She nodded, emotions warring on her face: relief, sadness, the weight of having taken a life, even in self-defense. Tucker stepped closer and gently wiped the blood from her cheek with his thumb. You did what you had to do, he said. He gave you no choice. Daisy leaned into his touch, finding comfort in the connection. What happens now? We still head to Virginia City, Tucker replied. The territorial judge needs to know what happened here, and your claim needs to be secured legally. They gathered the wounded outlaws, binding their injuries as best they could and securing them to their horses. The men would face justice in Virginia City for their crimes. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Tucker and Daisy mounted their horses and continued their journey, the weight of the day's events hanging between them. Neither spoke much, each lost in their own thoughts. Virginia City appeared in the distance just as dusk was falling, its lights twinkling in the gathering darkness like earthbound stars. They rode directly to the courthouse, where the territorial judge, an old acquaintance of Tucker's, was working late. Judge Samuel Whitman listened gravely to their story, examining Daisy's claim papers and taking statements about Rawlins' crimes. By midnight, everything was officially documented: Daisy's claim secured, warrants issued for the surviving members of Rawlins' gang, and their actions in self-defense deemed justified. "You've both been through quite an ordeal," the judge said as they prepared to leave. "The hotel across the street has clean rooms available. I suggest you get some rest." Tucker thanked the judge, then guided an exhausted Daisy to the hotel. He secured 2 adjoining rooms and saw her safely to her door. "Will you be all right?" he asked, reluctant to leave her alone after everything they'd been through. Daisy looked up at him, her eyes reflecting emotions too complex to name. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "Everything happened so fast. My father, the Chase Rawlins, I haven't had time to really feel any of it." Tucker understood all too well. "The feelings will come," he said gently. "When they do, remember you're not alone." Their eyes held for a long moment, the connection between them deepening with each passing second. Daisy reached up and touched his cheek, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "Thank you," she whispered. "Not just for saving my life, but for helping me find justice for my father." Tucker caught her hand in his, pressing a gentle kiss to her palm. "Get some rest, Daisy. Tomorrow is a new day." She nodded and reluctantly stepped into her room, closing the door softly behind her. Tucker stood there a moment longer, his heart full of emotions he hadn't felt in years, before retiring to his own room. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Tucker woke early, his mind already working through the possibilities that lay ahead. He had no real ties, nothing holding him to any particular place. For the first time in years, he was contemplating a future that included someone else. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Opening it, he found Daisy standing there, looking rested and resolved. "I've made a decision," she said without preamble. "About the claim." Tucker invited her in, curious about the determination in her voice. "What have you decided?" "I'm going to sell it," Daisy said, sitting in the chair by the window. "There's a mining company in town that's already expressed interest. The judge put me in touch with them this morning." Tucker nodded, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in his chest. With the money from the claim, Daisy could go anywhere, do anything. Return to Boston, perhaps to the life she'd left behind. "That sounds sensible," he said carefully. "What will you do after?" Daisy looked at him directly, her eyes clear and certain. "That depends on you, Tucker Holt." He blinked in surprise. "On me?" "Yes," she said simply. "I've been thinking about dreams, mine and yours, about teaching and about finding a place where right is right and wrong is wrong." Tucker's heart began to race as Daisy continued. "There's a town about 50 miles west of here, Silver Creek. It's growing, prosperous from the silver mines. The judge told me they're looking for a school teacher." Her eyes never left Tucker's face as she spoke. He also mentioned they need a sheriff, someone honest, someone who can't be bought. Understanding dawned in Tucker's eyes. "Daisy, are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we both chase our dreams," she said, her voice soft but certain. "Together, if that's something you might want." Tucker crossed the room in 2 strides, taking her hands in his and drawing her to her feet. "I can't think of anything I want more," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Daisy smiled up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "It won't be easy. We've known each other only a few days." "The most important days of my life," Tucker replied. "Days that showed me exactly who you are, Daisy Turner, brave, determined, compassionate, fierce when you need to be." "And they showed me who you are," Daisy said, reaching up to touch his face. "A man who rides into danger to help a stranger, who keeps his word, who believes in justice even when the world makes it difficult." Their lips met in a kiss that felt like coming home after a long journey, tender at first, then deepening with the promise of all that might lie ahead. When they finally parted, both were smiling, the future suddenly bright with possibilities. 6 months later, the schoolhouse bell rang in Silver Creek, signaling the end of the day's lessons. Daisy gathered her books as her students filed out, their voices echoing in the late afternoon air. Through the window, she could see Tucker approaching on horseback, returning from his rounds as sheriff. She stepped outside to meet him, her heart still skipping a beat at the sight of him after all these months. He dismounted, tipping his hat to her with that smile that never failed to warm her from the inside out. "Mrs. Holt," he greeted her, the title still new enough to bring a flush to her cheeks. "Sheriff," she replied with mock formality before breaking into a smile. "How was your day?" "Peaceful," Tucker said, taking her hand as they walked toward the small house they shared at the edge of town. "Just the way I like it." Daisy squeezed his hand, thinking of the journey that had brought them here from a desperate chase through wolf-infested woods to building a life together in this growing town. The gold claim that had cost her father his life had funded not only the school where she taught, but also several other improvements to Silver Creek, including a proper jail and courthouse where Tucker could ensure justice was served fairly. As they reached their home, Tucker paused, drawing her into his arms. "Any regrets?" he asked softly, a question he still posed occasionally, as if to reassure himself that she was truly happy with the life they'd chosen. Daisy stood on tiptoe to kiss him, pouring all her love into the gesture. "Not a single one," she replied against his lips. "How could I regret finding the man who showed me that even when I'm cornered by wolves, there's always hope?" Tucker smiled, remembering those fateful words he'd spoken in the forest that night. "Then let's see who bites harder," he quoted softly. "We bit harder," Daisy said with certainty, "and we won." As the sun set over Silver Creek, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Tucker and Daisy Holt walked hand in hand into their home and their future, a future built on courage, justice, and a love that had been forged in the face of danger and grown stronger with each passing day.